If you walk out of this room for that kid, you lose everything. You understand that, Marcus?
The words hung in this glass-walled conference room like a verdict. Marcus Reed's hand tightened around his phone until his knuckles went white against his dark skin. On the screen, the hospital's number flashed again and again, like a siren he couldn't unhear. Across the table, the CFO stared him down. Around them, the board of directors shifted impatiently in leather chairs. Floor-to-ceiling windows opened onto the city and the gray-blue line of the harbor. Plans, renderings, projections, his work, glowed on the screen behind him. But all Marcus could hear was the shallow, frightened breathing on the voicemail he'd just replayed in his head. "Mr. Reed, this is St. Mary's. It's about Zoe. You need to get here as soon as possible." His daughter. His adopted daughter. The only reason he still woke up in the morning. He swallowed hard. The CFO's voice came again, cleaner this time, sharper, cutting through the panic. "If you leave, the deal dies. The project dies. Your position here?" "Gone. The stock hit will be on Camille, and I will make sure they know it was because she bet everything on a single father who couldn't keep his head in the game." Marcus looked across the table. Camille Hart sat there, spine straight, brown eyes fixed on him. Her blazer was immaculate, her hair pulled back, the CEO of Hart Urban Renewal in every line of her posture. But in her gaze, beneath the steel, there was something else. A question. A plea. Trust yourself. He could feel every eye in the room pressing on him, weighing his answer. Projects like this didn't land in the lap of ex-maintenance men. Men like him didn't get second chances, not at this scale, not in this city. But men like him also knew what hospital hallways smelled like at 3 a.m. Men like him remembered what it was like to arrive too late. His fingers twitched on the door handle. To understand why this choice was breaking him open from the inside, we have to go back a few weeks. Before the boardroom, before the suit. Back to a narrow street in the old harbor district where a black single father was just trying to keep the lights on and his little girl breathing. The morning air in Harbor Light tasted like salt and exhaust. Marcus stood at the cracked kitchen counter of his tiny second-floor apartment, lining up the morning routine like a ritual. Inhaler, spacer, glass of water. The little white bottle of pills that cost more than last month's rent. "Slow breaths, Zoe," he said softly. "In, out." Zoe sat at the table, swinging thin legs that didn't quite reach the floor. Her small brown fingers wrapped around the spacer as she took a puff from the inhaler, eyes focused on the sticker of a cartoon astronaut he'd put on it to make it less scary. "In, out," she echoed, mimicking his tone. Her voice was light, a little raspy. She was 8, but sometimes her lungs made her sound older, like she'd spent a lifetime already breathing bad air. He watched her chest carefully, tracking the rise and fall, the subtle pull at the ribs. Old habits, hospital habits, foster care habits. People sometimes forgot she wasn't his by blood. They never forgot it around social workers, of course. It was in every form, every home visit, every polite question that wasn't really a question. "Any new health incidents, Mr. Reed? You're managing okay as a single parent? No extended family to support?" He always answered the same way. "I'm managing. She's my daughter. That's all you need to write down." He'd signed the adoption papers 3 years ago, after the mall collapse that killed her parents, his best friend, and the woman who'd treated Marcus like a brother. Zoe had been pulled out of the rubble with glass in her hair and dust in her lungs, eyes staring up at a sky full of sirens. She had no one. He had guilt he couldn't name and blueprints he never wanted to see again. So he became her someone. Now, in the dim morning light, her curls were a messy halo, her pajamas had cartoons on them, and that same pair of eyes was squinting at him over the spacer. "Dad?" "Yeah, baby?" "You're doing the staring thing again." He blinked, caught. "The what thing?" The thing where you look like you're not in the room. She took another careful puff. I'm okay. See? She made a show of taking a deep, dramatic breath. It turned into a cough halfway through, but she rode it out, eyes still on him, like she was the one checking his breathing. He forced a smile. Yeah, I see you. He tapped the table. Finish that cereal. Bus'll be here in 15. The apartment was small. One bedroom, one living room, pretending to be another bedroom. A galley kitchen that creaked when you turned too fast. Paint peeled in the corners. The window over the sink looked out onto the rust-streaked brick of the neighboring building. Beyond that, if you leaned far enough out, you could see the harbor. Dad? Zoe's voice was softer now. Do you think, one day, we could live in a place where you can see the ocean without standing on the counter and almost falling out the window? Marcus huffed. First of all, I have never almost fallen out the window. You did last week. That window and I have an understanding, he said. What kind of place are we talking here? She thought for a second, eyes going dreamy. Big windows, lots of light, no mold, no creepy pipes that make noises at night, and a balcony, so I can see the ships go in and out, like a rooftop garden, but smaller, like in the pictures. He looked at her, at the way hope softened her face. We'll get there, he said quietly. One day. You always say that? And I'll keep saying it, he replied, picking up her backpack, until it stops being one day and starts being today. Let's move. He had 3 jobs, technically. On paper, he was a maintenance tech for Harbor Light Transit, checking bolts on overhead lines, listening to steel hum under his boots, making sure other people's commutes didn't turn into someone's nightmare. Off paper, he patched leaky roofs, unclogged drains, and fixed whatever broke in the old harbor district for people who couldn't afford to call anyone else. Half the time, they paid him in cash. The other half, they paid him in gratitude and dishes of food he didn't really have time to eat. None of it touched what he used to make. Before the collapse. Before the headlines. Before the questions about load calculations and missed inspections and who had signed off on what. He'd been a structural engineer once. One of the few black faces in the room, and the only one whose name had showed up on the late-night news when the mall roof came down. They cleared him in the official report. The city moved on. He didn't. He traded CAD models and skyscraper dreams for busted pipes and broken doors, for simple problems with solutions he could touch. He traded the title on his office door for a little girl's hand in his. If that meant the big projects went to someone else, so be it. Buildings could fall. Families already had. He wasn't going to let another one. He noticed the balcony because of Zoe. He always did, really. She had a way of seeing things that weren't quite right, like the world was a puzzle she couldn't stop trying to solve. They were on their way back from the bus stop, walking up the narrow sidewalk between leaning row houses and old lampposts. The sea air had teeth that day, biting through his jacket. Zoe chattered about art class, clutching a wrinkled drawing to her chest. Look, Dad, she said suddenly, stopping so abruptly he almost tripped over her. That railing looks sad. He followed her finger to the building across from theirs. The second-floor balcony sagged just slightly, its iron railing stained orange-brown with rust. Pitted metal, flaking paint. One of the vertical bars was cracked halfway through. He frowned. The building itself wasn't much. Faded red brick, a narrow green door, one of those old mail slots that clanked when the wind hit it just right. He'd seen a woman step out once or twice. Nice coat, expensive shoes, not the kind of person who usually stayed long in Old Harbor. You're right, he murmured. He could see it in his head already. A kid leaning just a little too hard, an adult turning at the wrong angle, weight where the railing couldn't take it. Stay here a sec, he said. Dad, sidewalk only. No stairs, you hear me? She nodded. He went up the 3 steps to the green door and knocked. It opened after a moment, and the warm smell of coffee slid out into the cold. The woman in the doorway looked like she belonged in a different neighborhood. A tailored blouse under a soft gray sweater, delicate gold chain at her throat, hair pulled back in a neat twist. She had light brown skin, like coffee with too much cream, and eyes that studied him quickly, taking in work boots, faded hoodie, the calloused hands braced casually on his tool bag. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Ma'am," he said, gesturing to the balcony. "Sorry to bother you, I live across the street. That railing up there?" He pointed. "It's not safe. I saw a crack in one of the bars from down here." Her gaze followed his hand, then sharpened. "I don't go out there much," she said. "Good," he replied. "Please don't. Not until it's fixed." She looked back at him, eyebrows lifting. "You're a contractor, or just the neighborhood safety monitor?" He almost said engineer. The word caught in his throat. "Maintenance," he said instead. "Transit by day, everything else by night. I can fix it. Just cover materials." "You're offering to repair my balcony for cost?" There was a note of skepticism in her voice, and something else. Curiosity. He shrugged. "I got a kid. I'd rather not watch an ambulance struggle up this street for something we could have seen coming." Her eyes slid past him to where Zoe stood, hugging her drawing, watching them like it was a scene from a movie. "Is she yours?" the woman asked. "Yeah," he said. "She's mine. He didn't say adopted. He never felt the need. The world reminded him often enough." Zoe waved cheerfully. The woman's face softened almost imperceptibly. "I'm Camille," she said finally, stepping back. "Camille Hart." "Marcus," he replied. "Marcus Reed." She hesitated, then nodded toward the stairs. "Come in. Show me what you're talking about." The balcony was worse up close. Rust ate into the joints. The crack Zoe had noticed was thin as a hairline fracture on an X-ray, but it was there, spider webbing out from one of the welds. Marcus ran his fingers lightly along the metal, eyes narrowed. He didn't need instruments to see where the stress would land. "You been getting a lot of storms?" he asked. "Harbor light?" Camille said dryly. "We get one every week. Salt air doesn't help." "Is this a sales pitch or a diagnosis?" "Bit of both." He knelt, checking where the railing met the concrete. "This whole system's tired. It's not about looks, it's about fatigue. It's been holding its breath for a long time." He heard her shift behind him. "You always talk about metal like it's a person?" she asked. "Only when it's trying to fall apart on me." He could feel her watching as he paced out the balcony's length, counting silently, visualizing load paths, anchorage points. The old know-how hummed alive in his fingertips, muscle memory and engineering school and 10 years of practice slipping back into place before he could stop it. He hated how good it felt. "You really do this for transit?" she asked. "Seems like more than patchwork knowledge." He kept his eyes on the railing. "A lot of people depend on trains staying in the air. Doesn't leave much room for sloppy." "That's not what I meant." "I know what you meant," he said, a little sharper than he planned. Silence. Then, "Let me pay you what it's worth. Not just materials." He shook his head. "I said cost. I meant it." "Why?" He looked up then, finally meeting her gaze. "Because sometimes keeping something from breaking is more important than what you get out of it." Their eyes held for a moment that felt too long. There was a flicker there, something like recognition. Then Zoe's cough floated up from downstairs, breaking the spell. "Dad," she called, "can I draw the balcony while you fix it?" "Stay on the steps," he called back. Camille's mouth curved. "She listens to you." "Most days," he said. "Some days we negotiate." "She yours by blood?" The question slipped out before she could catch it. She winced. "Sorry, that was—" "It's fine," he said, voice even. "No, she's adopted. Lost her parents in an accident. I signed the papers 3 years ago." He checked the railing again, forcing his tone light. "Best terrible decision I ever made." Camille's eyes searched his face. You don't look like it was terrible. He smiled, small and soft. First few months, I didn't sleep. She didn't breathe right. I didn't know what I was doing. But she kept looking at me like I was supposed to have the answers. And do you? Some days, he said. On a good week, I'm just one step ahead of the next medical bill and half a step ahead of the next crisis. Something in her expression gentled. You're doing all right, she said quietly. He grunted. Fix this rail. I'll sleep better. He didn't see the way she kept studying him as he measured and muttered, as he made a miniature scaffolding out of numbers and angles. He didn't see that she didn't write his name down because she didn't need to. She already knew it. It was a week later when he broke his own rule. The day had been long. 2 shifts at the depot, a busted pipe in Mrs. Alvarez's bathroom that turned into 4 hours of fishing, decades-old hair out of ancient drains. By the time he got home, his shoulders ached and his brain felt like wet concrete. Zoe was at the small table, coloring. The apartment smelled faintly of tomato sauce. Someone downstairs had been cooking. Hey, trouble, he murmured, dropping a kiss on top of her curls. You okay? She nodded without looking up. Math homework isn't okay, but I am, he chuckled. Good to know. He glanced out the window. The newly reinforced balcony across the street stood solid, dark against the dusk. As he was about to turn away, light shifted in Camille's apartment. For a second, he could see straight into her living room. A large table, a laptop, a stack of rolled-up plans, blue lines on white paper, glimpsed through the glass. Something in his chest tightened. He turned away. A knock at his door stopped him halfway to the kitchen. When he opened it, Camille stood in the hallway, coat unbuttoned, hair loosened from its usual strict twist. She looked almost uncertain. Hi, she said. Hey, he replied. Balcony holding up okay? Like it's been going to the gym, she said. Her gaze flicked over his shoulder. Is this a bad time? No, just math. He raised an eyebrow. What's up? She held up a Tupperware. My housekeeper made too much pasta. I didn't want to throw it away. He frowned. You could have just brought it to the shelter on 3rd. I could have, she said, stepping past him into the apartment like she'd been here before. But then, who would explain this to me? She set the Tupperware down and pulled something out of her bag. A sketchbook. His sketchbook. The one he kept in his backpack out of habit, like a talisman of his old life. His spine stiffened. Where did you... You left it on my table the other day when you wrote up the materials list, she said quickly. I meant to bring it back sooner. Then I opened it. He stared at her, heat rising in his face. You shouldn't have. I know, she said. I'd love to tell you I only looked at the first page, but that would be a lie. He said nothing. From the table, Zoe watched them like they were TV. Marcus, Camille went on, flipping through, careful fingers revealing page after page of lines and arches, load paths and light wells. This is not just maintenance. These are full structural concepts. Facade studies. You designed a cantilevered rooftop garden that makes my last architect look like he cheats off high schoolers. He reached for the book. It's nothing, old stuff. She pulled it back just out of reach, not teasing, just insistent. Is it? He exhaled. The air felt too thick. I was an engineer, a long time ago. What happened? A building fell, he said flatly. People died. Your dinner's gonna get cold. She flinched at the bluntness, but didn't back down. You think I'm going to walk out after that sentence? I think a smart person would. Good thing I've never been accused of that. He almost laughed, despite himself. She took a breath. Come over, just for an hour. I want to show you something. You can bring Zoe. There's more space on my table for her homework. Zoe's head snapped up. Does more space mean snacks? Camille smiled. If you like chocolate chip cookies, then yes. Dad, Zoe whispered, eyes wide. She has cookies. He looked between them, the woman with the expensive coat and the building plans, the little girl with ink smudges on her fingers and hope on her face. An hour, he told himself. Just an hour. He wasn't prepared for Old Harbor Hall, not even on paper. Camille's place was simple but well kept. Wood floors, tall bookshelves, big windows looking out over the narrow street. On her dining table, she'd pushed aside a laptop and a few files to clear room for a spread of cookies, juice for Zoe, coffee for him. And in the center, like a patient on an operating table, lay the prince. Old Harbor Hall, she said, tapping the main elevation. Built in 1923. Used to be a music hall, then a cinema, then a half-hearted event space. City wants to tear it down and put up a lifestyle mall. Marcus studied the lines, the brick arches, the glass that had once reflected the sea. You want something different, he said. I want to keep its soul, she replied. But these plans? She gestured to the conservative proposal from a big-name firm. Safe, boring. They treat it like a box to be repackaged, not a story to be told. He swallowed, eyes tracing the trusses on the roof plan. The loads, the spans. He could almost hear the echoes of old music, the way a crowd's weight shifted underfoot. Why are you showing me this? He asked. Because of this. She flipped his sketchbook open to a page with a sunlit atrium and a rooftop garden woven into the structure like it had always belonged there. You drew this a year ago. A hall for the city to breathe, you wrote. Old brick, new light. This is Old Harbor Hall. He hadn't realized he'd written the words. Sometimes things fell out of his hands before he had time to stop them. He shook his head. I'm not your guy. You need someone with a license on the wall and a firm behind their name. I have those, she said. I also have a board that thinks nostalgia is a liability and heritage is just a tab on the budget. What I don't have is someone who can walk into a building everyone else has given up on and feel where it still wants to stand. He looked at the plans again. At her. At Zoe, who had sprawled on the far end of the table with her homework, listening without pretending not to. I swore I was done, he said quietly. After the mall, I saw what happens when numbers on paper don't match steel in real life. When someone higher up decides shortcuts are cheaper than safety. I read that report, she said. His head snapped up. You what? I do my homework, she said evenly. Your calculations were sound. The fault was in the construction. They proved that. Tell that to the families, he said. To Zoe's parents. Camille's gaze flicked to the girl, then back. She's my best friend's kid, he said. They died in that collapse. She went into the system. I couldn't sleep picturing her in those homes, waiting for someone who didn't know her name. So I signed. I walked out of the office with a kid and a box of my things. I traded steel and glass for this. He gestured around the small room. For inhalers and nightlights and a whole lot of we're gonna be okay, even when I didn't believe it. And you think that makes you... what? Unqualified? She asked softly. Marcus, you're a black single adoptive dad keeping a kid alive in a city that wasn't built for either of you. You're overqualified in every way that actually matters. He let out a breath that felt like it had been trapped for 3 years. You're good with words, he muttered. I'm better with numbers, she countered. And with bets. Let me make one on you. He stared at Old Harbor Hall, at the sick old building with its cracked facade and forgotten stories. You'd have to deal with my schedule, he said. School meetings, doctor visits. Some nights I'm at the hospital instead of home. I can move meeting times, she said instantly. Call in remotely when you can't be in the room. We'll work around Zoe. Not the other way around. He blinked. Your board's okay with that? They will be, she said, a hint of steel sliding back into her tone. He thought of Zoe's sketch on their fridge, her dream apartment with big windows and a little balcony garden. He thought of the medical bills on the counter, the red circles, the due dates. He thought of how his fingers had itched, just for a second, touching Old Harbor's roof lines. 3 months, he said. Her eyes lit. 3 months? I'll consult unofficially for 3 months, he clarified. If it blows up, you can say I was just the guy who fixed your rail. She smiled, genuine and bright, transforming her face. Deal. From the end of the table, Zoe raised her hand. Excuse me. They both looked at her. If he designs a rooftop garden for your building, she said, very serious, can I visit it? I promise not to run. I'll walk like the signs say. I just want to see the ocean without standing on the counter. Camille glanced at Marcus, something loosening in her expression. If he designs it, she said, you can help pick the first plant we put there. The first time Marcus stood inside Old Harbor Hall, the silence pressed on him like a weight. Dust motes floated in shafts of muted light. Rows of empty seats stretched into the shadows. The stage, once alive with musicians and actors, was bare, a few twisted mic stands abandoned like bones. He ran his hand along the back of a chair. The wood was worn smooth by decades of hands and coat sleeves. This place has seen things, he murmured. Camille watched him from a few steps away, arms folded, coat pulled tight against the draft. You hear it, don't you? She asked. Hear what? The way it wants to stay up, she said. Not down. He snorted softly. Never met a building that wanted to go down. That's usually people. People like my board, she said wryly. He looked up at the ceiling, eyes narrowing, mind already working. Those trusses are old, but they're not dead. You reinforce here, tie into new steel along this line. Open a light well from the roof. You could bring the sky right down into the lobby. She smiled faintly. If you start talking like that in the presentation, half the board will accuse me of hiring a poet. They can call me whatever they want as long as the math checks out, he said. He walked the length of the hall, counting under his breath. His boots echoed on the scuffed floor. Every step, every measurement, was a conversation with the past. In the days that followed, his life rearranged itself around 2 centers of gravity, a little girl's breathing and an old building's heartbeat. Mornings were still inhalers and school buses. Afternoons, when he could spare them, were site walks and meetings with Camille and her team. Late nights were for calculations, load diagrams, and Zoom calls where his face appeared in a row of boxes filled with suits who had never set foot in Old Harbor Hall. Let me get this straight, one board member said in the first review. You want to keep nearly 80% of the existing structure, add a rooftop garden and a glass light well, and somehow this costs less than a full tear-down and rebuild? It's not just about cost, Marcus replied, forcing his voice not to shake. You save on materials, on demolition, on permits that come with new foundations. You earn back in branding, in community goodwill. People don't rally around lifestyle malls. They rally around stories. The CFO, Damon, expensive watch, colder than the room, leaned back in his chair. And what guarantees do we have that this sentimental attachment to brick isn't going to blow up in our faces if some inspection finds a crack you missed? I don't miss cracks, Marcus said, jaw tight. Camille spoke before Damon could retort. We'll do phase 0 testing, she said. Comprehensive scans before any major commitment. Marcus knows where to look. This isn't his first building. Actually, that's exactly what worries me, Damon said, eyes flicking to the screen where Marcus's name appeared. Marcus felt the room shift, felt Camille's attention sharpen. What's that supposed to mean? She asked. It means, Damon said, opening a folder, that we dug a little. Read engineering. structural consultant on the Harborview Mall project that went down 3 years ago. That ring a bell? A murmur swept the room. Marcus's stomach dropped. My involvement's in the public record, he said carefully. You would have seen the report. I was cleared. Cleared legally, sure, Damon said. But public perception is another story. Do we really want the headlines if someone connects the dots? Hart Urban's new golden boy had a front row seat at Harborview. That doesn't scream, trust us, we preserve history, Camille. It screams, we hire risk. Silence. Marcus stared at his own face on the screen. Tired eyes, dark skin, the lines that had deepened since the mall. He wanted to walk away right then. He didn't. We're not here to retry that case, Camille said, voice low but firm. We're here because Old Harbor Hall will either be another mall in a city full of malls, or it'll be what it was meant to be, a place people remember. Marcus knows what can go wrong when people cut corners. That makes him an asset, not a liability. The first proposal didn't get approved. They called it too ambitious, too risky, too expensive in a market that doesn't reward sentimentality. They told Camille to come back with something safer. For a few days after, Marcus thought that was the end of it. He waited for the call where she'd say, "Thank you for your time. We'll take it from here." It didn't come. Instead, she showed up at his door again, hair a mess, eyes blazing. They said no, she announced. I figured. We're going back, she said, with numbers they can't argue with and a story they can't ignore. You in? The part of him that wanted to pull back, to protect the fragile normal he'd built, opened its mouth. The part of him that remembered Zoe's eyes on that sketch of the rooftop garden spoke first. I'm in, he said. The afternoon of the final presentation, the sky over Harbor Light was the color of wet concrete. Marcus stood in front of Zoe's school, checking his watch. He'd traded his usual hoodie for a worn button-down and the one blazer he owned. It didn't hide the calluses on his hands, but nothing would. Zoe bounced on the curb beside him, backpack hanging off one shoulder. So, after your big meeting, she said, does that mean you'll be, like, the boss of the building? He smiled. Buildings don't have bosses, they have caretakers. She squinted up at him. Then you'll be the care boss. I can live with that. Her face turned serious. You're nervous? A little. You were nervous the first time you signed my foster papers, she said matter-of-factly. I heard you. You were breathing like this. She imitated heavy breathing, then giggled when he poked her side. That was different, he said. How? That was me choosing something I didn't feel ready for, he said softly. This is me. Wondering if I deserve another chance at something I used to love. She tilted her head. Dad, you fix broken things. That's like your whole deal. Why not a big building too? His phone buzzed. Camille's text. They're here. You ready? He squeezed Zoe's shoulder. Okay, kiddo. Ms. Turner will take you inside and I'll... Another buzz. Unknown number. He frowned and answered. Hello? Mr. Reed? A woman's voice. Tense. Professional. This is Nurse Parker from St. Mary's. Your daughter Zoe is here with us. She had an acute asthma episode at school. We stabilized her, but we need you to come as soon as you can. The world narrowed to that one word. Episode. How bad? He asked, voice thin. Her oxygen dropped, but she responded to the nebulizer. She's asking for you. His hand shook. I'm on my way, he said. He hung up and knelt in front of Zoe. Hey, he said, hating the way his voice trembled. You're going for a little ride with Nurse Parker, okay? I'm going to the hospital. Her eyes widened, then narrowed in suspicion. Did they say the word episode? He almost laughed. Yeah, she sighed like a tiny old woman. I told them I was fine. You're going anyway, he said. Promise me you'll listen to them? She nodded slowly. Promise me you won't do the thing. What thing? The thing where you act like you have to choose between me and everything else, she said quietly. You always pick me. I know that. But you don't have to be afraid of everything, Dad. He swallowed hard. Everything else in this case was a boardroom on the 20th floor and a project that could change their lives. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'll be there as soon as I can. They took her away in an ambulance. Half an hour later, he was in the glass room. The board sat in their usual line, screens open, papers spread. Old Harbor Hall filled the monitors behind him, his latest renderings showing light pouring through a new skylight, a rooftop terrace with native plants. People gathered where dust and silence lived now. Camille sat beside him, shoulders squared. Damon spoke first. Let me be clear, he said. This is your last shot. If the numbers don't work, we go with the demolition and the mall. No more nostalgia tours. Understood, Camille said. Marcus presented. He spoke of steel and brick, of reusing foundations, of life cycle costs and tax credits for preservation. He showed graphs, maps, case studies from other cities. He showed the math that proved they could keep the bones of Old Harbor Hall and still make money. He tried not to think about Zoe's tiny body in a hospital bed. The presentation ended. Questions began. If the scans reveal structural compromise you missed, that's an extra $1 million at least, one director said. The risk is higher with a renovation. Community response is unpredictable. People say they want history until they see the price of tickets. It was Damon's phone buzzing that broke Marcus's focus. Actually, it was his own. Nurse Parker, she's asking where you are. She's scared. The words blurred. He didn't hear the next question. Marcus? Camille's voice, soft but urgent. They asked about... His phone buzzed again. A photo this time. Zoe in a hospital bed, mask over her face, eyes too wide. His heart clenched. Reed, Damon said sharply. We're waiting. Marcus looked at the CFO, at the row of suits, at the building on the screen that had become a symbol of something he couldn't quite name. Then his eyes found Camille's. She shook her head, just barely. Not a no. More like a do what you need to do. If you walk out of this room for that kid, you lose everything, Damon said. You understand that, Marcus? There it was. The line in the sand. The test he hadn't studied for. 3 years ago, he'd been on a site visit when the call came about the mall. He hadn't gotten there in time. He still woke up some nights with the sirens echoing in his ears. He thought of the day he signed Zoe's adoption papers, hands shaking, heart racing, saying yes to a life he didn't know how to live yet. He thought of how small her hand had been when she first slipped it into his. He looked Damon in the eye. No, Marcus said quietly. You're wrong. The room went still. I don't lose everything if I walk out, he continued. If I stay, that's when I lose everything that matters. He turned to Camille. I'm sorry. She swallowed. Go. He nodded once, then picked up his bag. No one moved to stop him. The door clicked shut behind him like a period at the end of a long, hard sentence. They tried to pin it all on him. Marcus found out later, sitting in a plastic chair outside Zoe's room, coffee cooling in his hands. They called an emergency executive session after you left, Camille said, dropping into the chair beside him, heels dangling from her fingers. She looked exhausted and more alive than he'd ever seen her. They voted to table the project. Damon pushed for demolition. Said hiring you was emotional decision-making on my part. They want a full review of my judgment. He winced. Camille, Don't, she said sharply. Don't apologize for being a father. He stared at her. You stood up for me in there, he said. And I walked. You walked toward your kid, she said. My father didn't. The words hung between them. She exhaled, shoulders slumping. He was an architect, like you. Brilliant. Black man in a field that barely let him in the lobby. When my mom got sick, he stopped taking big projects. Said he'd go back after she got better. Her gaze went distant, finding something in the blank hospital wall. She didn't get better. She died. And by the time he tried to go back, the world had moved on. He died regretting the work he never finished, and the nights he wasn't fully present even when he was home. She looked at Marcus. I built this company so I could do both. Build things and not abandon people. If my board can't understand that, maybe I'm at the wrong table. He rubbed a hand over his face. What did they decide? 1 week, she said. 1 more week. Bring them something that knocks out every argument, closes every gap, makes Old Harbor Hall a deal they'd be stupid to refuse. Or they move on without us. Us? He echoed. I told them I'm not throwing you under the bus for doing exactly what I'd want every parent on this planet to do, she said. If you go, I go. He stared at her. That's reckless. That's partnership, she corrected. He didn't know what to do with that word. A soft knock on the door saved him. Mr. Reed? Nurse Parker peeked in. She's asking for you. Zoe looked too small in the hospital bed. Plastic rails framed her like a tiny version of the balcony he'd fixed. Machines beeped softly in the background, IV lines snaked from her arm, and the oxygen mask fogged slightly with each breath. When she saw him, her eyes crinkled above the clear plastic. You came, she whispered when he sat down. Of course I did, he said, brushing curls off her forehead. You're supposed to be at your big building meeting, she said. Ms. Hart said it was important. He swallowed. You're more important. She rolled her eyes under heavy lids. Obviously. But you know you can, have 2 important things at the same time, right? It doesn't have to be either or. He laughed, a broken little sound. Who told you that? Miss Turner. She said adults are the ones who make rules that hurt them. Smart woman. Zoe's fingers curled around his. Dad? Yeah? Are you scared? He stared at their joined hands, at the smallness of hers, the way his thumb nearly covered her knuckles. Yeah, he said. All the time. She processed that, then nodded. Okay, me too. But I still like it better when you draw buildings. You look less far away. Drawings don't pay for hospital stays, he murmured. Maybe this one will, she said, eyes drooping. You should let it try. She drifted off, breaths evening out, machines beeping their quiet lullaby. Marcus sat there for a long time, listening to the sounds of a ward that knew too much about fear. Sometime after midnight, Camille returned with a laptop and a paper bag of vending machine snacks. If we have a week, she said, dropping the bag on the table, we're using it. He stared at her. You serious? He asked. Very, she said. If we're going down having done the work right. He glanced at his sleeping daughter. She's stable, Camille murmured. I checked. They'll page you if anything changes. Until then, she opened the laptop. Old Harbor Hall glowed on the screen. He took a breath. Then he opened his sketchbook. For the next few days, hospital corridors became their war room. Marcus fine-tuned load paths and reinforcement details, weaving safety into every beam and column. He dug up case studies on adaptive reuse, quantified every intangible benefit the board had rolled their eyes at before. Camille tore apart his cost estimates and rebuilt them with tax incentives and long-term revenue models. She crafted a narrative that even Damon would have trouble twisting. Less risk, more gain, and a community darling in the making. They argued over numbers, over wording, over whether the rooftop garden needed 2 trees or 10 in the rendering. They shared cold coffee and warmer glances they pretended not to notice. Nurses started bringing them better snacks. Zoe watched from her bed, sketching her own version of Old Harbor Hall. Stick figures holding hands on the rooftop, flowers as big as faces. By the end of the week, the proposal felt less like a pitch and more like a promise. To the city, to the building, to themselves. The second time Marcus walked into that glass-walled conference room, he wasn't alone. Camille walked beside him, shoulders squared. Outside, the sky was brighter. The harbor looked almost blue. Damon looked the same. "Let's get this over with," he said. Marcus started with the facts. He laid out the updated scans, the reinforcement plan, the staged construction to minimize surprises. He showed the revised budget, the shortened timeline, the contingency fund for any hidden damage. Then Camille picked up the story. She talked about Harbor Light's identity, about cities that lost their character under a wave of identical developments. She showed testimonials from community leaders, letters of support from the Arts Council, preliminary inquiries from sponsors drawn in by the idea of a hall reborn. Finally, Marcus took one last step forward. He didn't look at his notes. "I'm not naive," he said. "You're not in this room to protect feelings. You're here to protect investments. I get that. I also get what it's like when something fails under your watch." He let that hang for a moment. "When Harborview fell," he continued, voice steady, "I walked away from buildings. I told myself I was protecting people by staying small. But the truth is, people are going to build things with or without me, with or without us. The question is whether we let the cheapest option win or we step up and do it right." He nodded toward the renderings of Old Harbor Hall. "This building has stood through storms, through neglect, through decades of bad decisions. It could have collapsed 10 different times, but it didn't. It's still here. So are the people who remember dancing there, watching their first movie there, meeting the person they built a life with there." He thought of Zoe, of the way she'd drawn the rooftop. "I'm a black single adoptive father," he said plainly. "I've spent the last 3 years learning how to hold up the world for one kid who lost hers. That means I know something about weight, about what breaks and what bends and what can be rebuilt if you do the work." He took a breath. "I'm not promising you 0 risk. I'm promising you that if you trust me with this, I will treat every beam, every bolt, every person who walks onto that terrace like they're my own family. I'll give this city a building that remembers where it came from and still makes room for where it's going." Silence. Someone shifted. A chair creaked. Damon cleared his throat. "What about exit projections on year 10? Trust a CFO to drag things back to decimal points." Camille pulled up the slide with long-term revenue models. "You'll see here." The questions that followed were pointed but different this time. Less about whether the idea was ridiculous, more about how to make it real. By the time they finished, Marcus couldn't tell which way the wind was blowing. He only knew he'd said what needed to be said. He and Camille stepped out into the hallway while the board voted. For once, she looked nervous. "You did good," she said finally. "So did you." "If this goes south," she added, a half-smile ghosting across her lips, "I hear they're hiring really intense balcony inspectors down on 5th. He huffed. "I prefer the term care boss." She blinked. "What?" "Nothing," he said quickly. The door opened. Damon's expression was unreadable. "We reviewed the numbers," he said. "The revised proposal." Marcus braced himself. "And?" Camille asked. Damon sighed. "You've backed us into a corner." Her eyes flashed. "That's not exactly in a good way," he cut in. "The city loves this. The sponsors love this. The risk profile's better than the mall plan. Frankly, we'd be idiots to say no at this point." A beat. "The board has approved the Old Harbor Hall restoration," he said. On the condition that we get quarterly progress reports and you, he nodded at Marcus, stay as far away from surprise PR headlines as possible. Marcus released a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. Camille smiled, slow and bright, like sunrise over the water. Then we have a deal, she said. As they walked toward the elevators, she bumped his shoulder lightly. Looks like you get to be care boss after all, she murmured. He blinked. You heard that? I hear more than you think, she said. Old Harbor Hall didn't transform overnight. Real healing never does. Scaffolding went up. Dust came down. Steel slid into place with the clang of second chances. Workers cursed and laughed and sweated, their voices echoing in a space that slowly, day by day, remembered itself. Marcus was there for as much of it as he could be, hard hat on, drawings rolled under his arm. He walked the beams, checked the welds, felt every vibration under his boots. Some nights he still woke up thinking of Harborview. But when he did, he'd look at the sketches taped to Zoe's wall, her versions of the rooftop garden full of flowers and stick figures, and remember why he'd stepped back into this world. Zoe grew stronger that year. The new medication regimen helped. So did the fact that her dad wasn't trying to be everywhere at once. When he was on site, Camille made sure meetings didn't run past school pickup. When he was at the hospital for checkups, contractors sent him photos and videos instead of waiting for him to show. And slowly, in the spaces between steel and schedules, something else grew too. On rainy afternoons, he and Camille would end up in the half-finished lobby, staring at the way light dropped through the newly opened roof. They'd talk about her father's regrets and his, about the strange weight of being the first in your family to stand where you did. I used to think success meant never having to need anyone, she confessed one evening, sitting on a stack of drywall. Now I think it might mean the opposite. Needing the right people, he said. She glanced at him. Yeah. On clear evenings, he'd find her on the temporary rooftop platform, hair blowing in the wind, eyes on the horizon. They'd stand side by side, not quite touching, watching the sun bleed into the ocean. Remember when this was just lines on paper? She asked once. Barely, he said. Feels like it's always been here. Some things are like that, she said. You don't realize you were making room for them until they arrive. He didn't ask if she meant the building or something else. He had his guesses. The night before the grand reopening, they snuck up onto the finished rooftop terrace together, Marcus, Zoe, and Camille. The garden was still young, but plants already curled around railings and spilled from raised beds. The harbor glittered beyond, ships moving like slow ghosts across the water. Zoe ran to the edge, stopping just short of the new railing. She rested her hands on the cool metal and looked out, eyes shining. You did it, she whispered. We did it, Marcus corrected, coming up beside her. See those joints? Your dad argued for those gusset plates for 2 hours. And I made sure they didn't cut the budget for native grasses, Camille added, joining them. Zoe grinned. You're both very dramatic. Camille laughed. Takes one to know one. Later, when Zoe got sleepy and curled up on a bench under a small tree, her tree, they covered her with Marcus's jacket. The city hummed below. Above them, stars blinked through the urban glow. Marcus and Camille leaned on the railing, shoulders almost touching. Thank you, he said. For what? She asked. For seeing more than a broken engineer, he replied. For making space for all this. For me being a dad first. She studied his profile. You did that. I just made sure the calendar listened. He shook his head. You did more than that. A pause. You know, she said softly, I told my board I was betting on you because of your experience. That was true. But I left something out. What's that? I wanted someone in charge of this place who knew what it meant to build a home out of ruins, she said. Someone who knew how to love something that scared them. There's no one more qualified for that than a single dad who adopted a kid from the worst day of his life. His throat tightened. He turned toward her. Camille. She looked up at him, eyes searching, open in a way he hadn't seen before. The moment stretched. He could feel the choice in it. Just like in the boardroom, just like the hospital, just like the first knock on her door. This time, the risk wasn't about steel or stock prices. It was about hearts. Maybe for once, that was exactly the kind of risk he was ready for. He didn't close the space between them all at once. He just shifted, just enough that their shoulders touched, solid and warm. She didn't move away. They stood like that, leaning against the rail he'd insisted on overbuilding, watching the city that had broken and rebuilt them both. Below them, Old Harbor Hall glowed. Above them, the sky opened. Inside, for the first time in a long time, something in Marcus settled. The season that began with collapse and hospital calls and choices that sliced him open was finally shifting. Winter, the long winter he'd been carrying for 3 years, was easing its grip. He looked down at Zoe, fast asleep under the little rooftop tree she'd claimed. He looked at Camille, whose life had collided with his over a rusty balcony. Feels like a new chapter, he murmured. Feels like home, Camille said. On opening night, the hall was full. Light poured through the skylight they'd carved into the old roof. Music flowed across polished floors. People laughed, clinked glasses, took photos in front of brick walls that still bore faint scars from decades of use. Marcus stood off to the side of the stage, tie crooked, hands in his pockets. Zoe clung to his arm, eyes wide with delight. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC said, please welcome the woman who made tonight possible, our own Camille Hart. Applause rose. Camille stepped up to the mic, radiant in a dark dress that made her look like she'd grown right out of the night sky. She talked about Harbor Light's past, about the hall's history, about the future they were stepping into. Then she did something that made Marcus's stomach flip. There is one person I have to thank, she said. Someone most of you didn't know before this project. Someone many of you frankly doubted when we began. She gestured toward him. Marcus, she called. Come up here. He shook his head instinctively. Zoe shoved him. Hard. Go, Dad, she whispered. His feet moved before his brain caught up. He stepped into the light. This is Marcus Reed, Camille said. Structural engineer, maintenance man, adoptive father, the man who refused to choose between his daughter and his work and somehow managed to turn that refusal into the backbone of this place. There was a little ripple of laughter. He blushed. When Harborview fell, the city tried to put that on him, she went on. But tonight, I want you to see the truth. We're standing in a building that is safer, stronger, and more beautiful because he came back to the work he was born to do. She glanced at him, eyes bright. Marcus, she said softly into the mic, thank you for holding this place up. He swallowed, stepping toward the mic. I didn't do it alone, he said. Couldn't have. Every person who swung a hammer, drew a line, signed a form, they're part of this. And so is one little girl who wouldn't let me be afraid forever. He looked at Zoe. She beamed. He looked at Camille. And one very stubborn CEO who refused to let either of us stay small, he added. The crowd laughed again, warmer this time. He took a breath. I used to think some things broke for good, he said. That some roofs fall and some families fall, and all you can do is stand in the wreckage and try to survive. But this building, my daughter, this woman next to me, they taught me something else. He let his hand rest for a moment on the old brick of the stage wall. Some things aren't meant to be demolished, he said. They're meant to be rebuilt, carefully, patiently. with more care than you gave them the first time. That's what Old Harbor Hall is. That's what we all can be, if we let ourselves. The applause that followed wasn't explosive. It was steady, solid, like footsteps on a floor that would hold. Later that night, when the music had faded and the guests were trickling out, Marcus found himself back on the rooftop terrace. Zoe leaned sleepily against his side, half listening to the faint echo of the band below. Camille stood in front of them, forearms resting on the rail, looking out at the harbor. "Hey," Marcus said. She glanced back. "Hey." "You were right," he said. "About what?" "Buildings wanting to stay up," he said. "People, too." She smiled, soft and sure. "I know." He slid an arm around her, testing the weight of it. She leaned in. Zoe looked up at them, eyes half closed, and smiled too. "See?" she mumbled. "Care, boss." "What was that?" Camille asked. "Nothing," Marcus said. The wind off the water was cold, but the three of them together were warm enough. Below them, Old Harbor Hall glowed like a heart that had finally remembered how to beat. If this story found its way into a quiet corner of your own life, if you've ever felt like your chance fell with something that broke, remember this. Some structures aren't supposed to be replaced. They're supposed to be repaired, reinforced, and given a second chance to stand. If you've ever been the kid waiting in the hospital bed, or the parent racing down the corridor, or the person afraid to come back to something you loved, you're not alone. If you'd like, leave a little message for Marcus and Zoe in the comments, maybe even for your own Old Harbor Hall. Sometimes, saying its name out loud is the first brace you lay in the rebuild.